Hi Jess, how are you?
Hi, good, thank you.
That's good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, a pleasure. It's lovely to have you and to get your input. So that will be great.
Thank you.
How's your day today?
As well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, no, sorry.
Oh, good. You're very soft.
Let me see if I can fix that.
And I've got you up pretty loud now. Try again.
How's that?
That's much better. Yep, perfect.
I have to turn mine up as well.
Yeah, it's good just to get the get these little bits right just at the beginning.
Yeah, no, it's good. I had to sit in here and set up a little lamp to make sure I had enough lighting.
That's great. Yes, I've just turned mine on too. I tend to get a bit of the setting sun here as it goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
so whereabouts are you based?
I'm in Sydney.
Oh,
yeah.
Lovely. Nice.
And how about you?
I'm just on the south coast, of New South Wales, about 2 hours south of Sydney.
All right, whereabouts?
In a small town called Culburra Beach.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I happen to know it because, believe it or not, I have a partner who's an absolutely crazy mad bird photographer.
All right.
It is a very, very popular spot for him because it's got some very good birds on it on a regular basis.
Interesting. There you go.
So we go down there, and I think there are some other water areas, and so he's really into the water birds big time. Oh,
that's good. I know just down the road from us is a big lake which has a lot of protected species.
There you go. It's a small, small world.
Yeah.
Hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
That's good. I might put my earplugs in.
Yep, we can see you, which is great.
And, is the light okay?
Yep, and we can hear you, which is great, which is wonderful. Thank you. Are you on a laptop or a computer?
On a laptop, yeah.
Yeah. Are you able to lift the laptop by about a telephone directory size? That's
oh yeah.
If you're old enough like me and you remember telephone directories.
Oh yeah, here I'll just use all these inclusion guides I've got.
Very appropriate.
That's ideal. Perfect. Then we can see the top of your head, which is really good.
Good. Thank you. I'll just turn it around the other way.
Yeah. Hi, Jill. How are you? And you're muted. Okay. Yep, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm getting there.
Hi, Jill.
Hey.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jill.
Jess. Jess.
It's been too long.
Bye. Right. I just feel like giving Jess a hug. It's been a while.
Virtual hugs are absolutely encouraged here.
All the rage these days, aren't they?
That's right.
They're trending, funnily enough.
Welcome, Chris. How are you?
Good, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Great.
Now, the only thing I'd recommend for you is, can you shut a door or a blind? There are two sources of a great deal of light behind you, which will detract from you. Okay, looking forward to 98 people joining us this evening, which should be really great.
Yeah, I saw that. That's going to be really good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really, really interesting discussion, given that I have had quite a few interesting inquiries from around the world.
Oh, okay.
Which is nice to know.
So, interesting in what sense?
Well, we've had a number of people who are people with deafness who want to join, hence the request that you are nice and close to the screen so that they can see your lips moving because they lip read. 2 of those people are actually in Iran, I believe.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
they can lip read in English, which is an amazing skill.
Wow.
And we've got, I've had a number of people. Thank you, Chris. That looks great. Yeah, that's definitely improved.
I'm not sure if that's any better.
No, it's good. We can definitely see you, and we can hear you, which is great. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yep, that's good. And you're close enough. Just say another few words.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you, meet you.
Yep, that's good. That's good. Yeah, so several or 2 or 3 people said that they certainly, because we send out our invitation initially, and that usually initially has just whoever has confirmed as a speaker. And so the first speaker, after the first invitation, I had a couple of people say, I hope you're not going to have an event without anyone with disabilities involved. So I assured them that we would, and there are a couple of people who are going to be joining as participants who also have disabilities, people with disabilities. So that will be good, so that will, I've got no doubt, add to the discussion that we have as well and broaden the topics that are brought up and the issues that are arising. So that's really, really good. And I did have someone dial in an hour ago, so I dialed in to let them know that it was going to be a little later, but that usually means they're somewhere else in the world and they've just got that time conversion slightly off. So hopefully it will all be very good. So we are, we're all organised. We're just waiting for Jackie, and I know she's joining us because I spoke to her, or I interacted with her a little bit earlier today. So
Chris, will we just hold off till the end for questions, or are you hoping to have questions in as we go, or what are you thinking there?
What I've said to Jackie is, because she's going to be facilitating, that after each person speaks, there might be a burning question that's come up either on the chat or she has an aspect to bring out. So we'll try to do maybe one question. That way it tends to break up the whole thing and give it a little bit of interest without losing the theme and the sort of momentum of the presentations. And at the end, we'll have lots of questions, I've got no doubt. And we will encourage people to put them into the chat. And then, and Jackie will be there to also pick those up through the chat, as well as seeing people who put their hand up. So that should be good. So is that okay with you, Chris?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, good. And hi, Leslie and Kerry.
How are you?
We have some people joining in, which is nice.
Yes.
Nice
to be here.
That's good. We can only see the top of your head though, Leslie.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's better. Now I can see your full beauty. That's good to know. Thank you. And the other thing that you'll find is that we get quite a few people who join who have their children with them.
Okay.
We've had a few dogs who've been very interested in the topics. 1 or 2 cats who like to be in the middle of things too. So
I don't have any children and I don't have any dogs.
Well, we welcome individuals as well. But we do find that we have lots of engagement and interest in the
Oh,
topic. So we enjoy that. Although we do still enjoy having everyone when we can get them together face to face, and we'll be aiming to try to do that again before the end of the year.
Yes.
But that just depends on how things go. We
Yes.
don't want to take any risks or any chances. That's the key thing.
Yes.
Mm.
Mm.
So welcome, Ayan. Is that the right way to say your name?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Lovely. Welcome. And Tricia, and a few more people. Tricia, nice to see you.
Nice to meet you. And it's just pronounced Maloney, by the way. We just can't spell.
Oh, right. The beauty of the English language as well. There are so many words that are very different from what they actually look like.
It's Sri Lankan Irish.
Oh, is it?
Mm.
Oh, wonderful.
Mm.
Great combination.
Yeah, so I'm part Sri Lankan.
Oh, right.
Husband part.
All right. Welcome. We are just waiting for our facilitator to join us, and a few more people. As I was saying earlier, we have 98 people registered. Usually that means a few people will drop out a little bit earlier. Here comes Jackie with her wonderful, is it Diwali, Jackie?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful celebration to be part of. Welcome.
Hi, sorry I couldn't find the Zoom link as quickly as I had anticipated.
No problems. That looks good. Now you've got quite a lot of light coming in from your right. That might be good to just dim up. Perfect.
Over to the cave. Hi, Jess. Hi, Miss Jill.
Nice to see you again.
And
Yep. We have got
Hi, Jack.
lots of people now starting to join us as we get up towards our 6 p.m. starter time. So I was just about to say we really love it when we have the ability to meet face to face and we can have a glass of wine and a few nibbles. So I am hoping a few of you.
I'm ready.
Good to see Jill. Few drinks out there.
Sorry, it's 6 o'clock in the evening. It's
Absolutely.
mandatory, especially in Victoria.
Well, we're delighted to see that you in Victoria have got a little tiny bit more freedom now. We welcome that because you guys, gosh, you've been doing it tough and you've been doing it on behalf of all of us.
Yes. Jackie's been driving me insane every week, showing me how many mountain walks she's going on and how many swims she's taking.
It's annoying, isn't it? I just tell them I'm all feeling quite nauseous and I'm going to vomit any minute.
Oh dear.
Bit hard to handle.
Yeah, she's got way too much freedom. Way too much.
Yeah. I always say, I've got something. Have you seen those suction gloves you can get? They help body surfers and they're like webbing between the hands. And I always say I've got some of those to help me climb the walls.
Well, you will all be able to send us a lot more of those videos now as you get out bigger distances and you're able to meet people, which is going to be a really nice thing for you all. We're very, very happy about that.
I've got a 6 months more of my lockdown.
Oh, have you? Where are you?
Melbourne. But I've got rubbish lungs, and I work in the hospital setting, so I don't go anywhere. I don't see anybody.
Oh, dear.
I live behind a golf course, and unfortunately, they've let the golfers back in. So I've lost my private parkland.
Oh, well, we really hope you do get a little bit more freedom soon.
Yeah.
That's great. I might just wait just a couple more minutes because people are streaming in now. Welcome to all of you as you join us for the evening. We're really happy to have so many people coming. We have, as I was saying, about 98 people who've registered. That usually means that we'll end up with about 70 people coming because there's always a challenge or two at the end of the day. Work that hasn't been finished, children that just won't settle, catastrophes that happen where the cats don't get their dinner or the dogs are demanding a walk. Mostly it tends to be the work that's interrupting, of course. But we're delighted to see so many people coming in. It's lovely to have you here. Welcome Sonia, our wonderful communications intern, who's doing some wonderful work for us in expanding our communications, and I hope you're all enjoying the different illustrations you're seeing. Tess, I'm sure, will be joining us soon, our wonderful webmaster. Or is it web mistress?
She's a webmaster, yeah.
Yeah, web wizard maybe. But you'll also be very soon seeing our wonderful new newsletter from Sonia. So I hope you enjoy it and you send us some feedback and tell us what else you'd like to see in the next edition. And we will be delighted to hear and put some of that in as we go forward. So we've still got people streaming in, so I will keep waffling on for a moment or two, as I am wont to do. And yes, so let's hope that before too long we can have some nice safe get-togethers with glasses of wine, a few nibbles, enthusiasm and encouragement, and a lot more of the interactive networking, which we would absolutely love to see, and which is of such value to so many people, because when you meet people, you get ideas, find someone who can give you a little bit of a few ideas, bit of a hand up, bit of a focus in terms of next steps in a career. And we would absolutely love to be able to get that going again. We've got a hello to Matt Remington. Hi, Matt. Lovely to have you here too. We are here and we're called Women in Aid and Development, but we absolutely welcome our men from the sector too. And we know that when they come along, they always have an interesting time. And they always give us a few interesting perspectives on what we're talking about and ideas. So welcome. Lovely to see that you've got the courage, Matt, to dive in and be part of the group. So thank you. So what I might do is I might just say a quick generic welcome. We will just let a few more people keep joining us. This is always very exciting, this part of the evening. We love to see people coming in and participating. But welcome everyone. Women in Aid and Development has been around since 2000 and I keep forgetting, I think it's 12. And it's a great organisation, bringing women together, and hopefully all of you are enjoying your information that is available. I am going to, in a moment, introduce our facilitator, Jackie Love, and Jackie will introduce you to our speakers, 3 speakers for the evening, all incredibly qualified with different backgrounds within the sector, focusing on working with people with disabilities. So we have, let me introduce Jackie and she will take us forward. So as you probably, most of you know, Jackie is a great supporter of Women in Aid and Development, a powerful voice in the global sport for development and peace sector. She is the co-founder of Sport Matters, and she's also the CEO of Sport Matters, based in Sydney, an NGO that uses sport to make a positive and long-lasting impact on development in Australia, Pacific, Asia, Africa. And she has made a huge contribution to the whole sector. She's going to share her perspective on sport, and also on her involvement within disability within the sports sector too, but we'll also be talking to our wonderful speakers. So as our numbers continue to climb, and I welcome everyone who's joining us, I'm going to hand across to Jackie, and I look forward very much to hearing from everyone this evening. And can I just remind everyone, I think everybody's actually pretty good so far, but just to keep yourself muted, just so that we don't get the feedback into the speakers. So over to you, Jackie, and welcome. And thank you so much for facilitating this evening.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris, and welcome everyone. It's so exciting to see so many people from all over the world joining this discussion today. And hi, Rain, I recognize your face there too. There's quite a few familiar faces on the call as well. If before we get stuck into the content, I'd like to encourage as many people as possible to turn on your cameras if you wish to, even if you do that on and off the discussion, just so we get a little bit of face recognition. It just helps with our networking so we can start to connect with each other a little more. Awesome. It makes a big difference to having a black screen. Brilliant. I also wanted to check the access. I know that there was a number of people that sent in some emails just ahead of this call, and a few people are lip reading during the conversation. So if there are any challenges or hiccups throughout the night, and I say night because you're going to watch me turn into the bat cave shortly as day turns into night in Sydney. I'll go back into the cabin that it looks like I am in for our overnight meetings. But if we are speaking too quickly, or if there are any challenges with communication, please make a note in the chat so that we can rectify that as quickly as we can, so we can all move ahead with the discussion together. And it is my absolute pleasure to open this discussion on improving the lives of persons with disabilities around the world. We're going to be tackling this topic this evening from a number of different angles and different viewpoints. And we are so privileged to have the three speakers lined up to share their experiences with us this evening, with Chris Kerr, with Alex Gatrell and Jess Richardson. And I'll introduce each of those in more detail before they each speak. But the format for our discussion this evening is that we'll have each of our speakers share their experiences on the topic for about 15 minutes. And then we'll take a couple of questions so that we can interact with some of the experiences that they've shared, and then move on to the next speaker. And then we can have a few more questions towards the end of the discussion. A couple of points on the topic area of disability, just to also get our heads into this mode. I wanted to just reinforce that we'll be tackling this topic from a platform of human rights. And one of the most fundamental instruments that underpins the disability inclusive development sector is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I'm tipping that you'll hear that from our speakers this evening. And the acronym for that is CRPD. That's one thing that I wanted to mention, and human rights will be mentioned a number of times. And it's absolutely our foundation and starting point for our thinking in approaching disability inclusive development. And the second point that I wanted to raise also, as we're looking at the journey towards disability inclusive development, noting that as practitioners and as organisations, we're all on a continuum. And some people will be starting at relatively early in their journey, and some people will be a little further along. And there are some on this call who are quite experienced and have been working in this space for decades. So no matter where you're coming from, we're going to take those fundamental principles forward throughout our dialogue. The other link that I wanted to make, just to frame our discussion, is on the Sustainable Development Goals. Noting that that's the 17 global goals that the world is working towards achieving to end poverty by 2030, and that there's no way that we're going to achieve those goals without the full inclusion and participation of persons with disabilities. So a couple of key points to frame our discussion. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Chris Kerr, who's joining us from Western Australia, I believe. And Chris is a passionate advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. She comes to us with a wealth of experience in human services and the private sector, and has a lot of experience with vocational education, the labour market, and disability sectors with a focus on human rights. Already that word's coming up again. Social inclusion and disability inclusive development. Chris led a team of Australian volunteers with disabilities to work in Laos, supporting local people with disabilities to grow. And she's a regional manager for Hope Community Services. And I'm not going to go through your whole bio, Chris, but I did want to introduce how our journeys have intersected. So Chris Franks introduced at the beginning that my background is largely with disability and sport. And in the team that you led to Laos, one of your team members was Shelley Chaplin, who I know very well through wheelchair basketball in Australia, and played wheelchair basketball for 10 years with Shelley. So having worked in Laos and connected with Shelley, I'm more than interested to hear what your experience is this evening. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you for that introduction, Jackie, and hello everybody. You'll have to bear with me. This is the first time I've done this kind of multi-forum with so many people in attendance. It's fantastic, and it's a testament to the work that this organisation is doing to empower women, particularly those women with disabilities in the development sector. As introduced, I have a long history in the disability sector, working and as an individual with disability myself. My passion is about inclusion and looking for ways to create inclusive development in the communities that people live. So I was lucky enough in 2017 to be part of a team that went to Laos to work with women's organisations, particularly the Lao Disabled Women's Development Centre. There was a team of 4 of us, and 2 of us worked with the Women's Centre and 2 worked in a Lao Disabled Advocacy organisation. As Jackie mentioned, Shelley Chaplin was one of our team, and she was responsible for supporting the Lao wheelchair basketball team to train and develop their skills and expertise to be able to attend the national games. And it was mainly aimed at men. So she coached a team of men, and because there were so many women with disabilities who were on the sidelines, it actually became very apparent very quickly that she was going to have to run double the program, because we had enough women there who wanted to be involved and play wheelchair basketball as well, which was fantastic and not something that we had expected. I guess for me, the most powerful thing about that experience was getting to work alongside women who work in non-profit organisations in a communist country that doesn't necessarily provide any government funding to the non-profit sector. So these organisations have to be very creative in how they support their user group and how they raise funds and provide services at a local level. Lao is actually a signatory to the UN Convention and does report on its progress. And I found that an interesting journey. Lots of government involvement in Lao in the disability sector, lots of meetings and government input, but still no funding available to support grassroots organisations. I'm not quite sure what sort of experience people are interested in learning about from my own journey, but I think for me, the challenge of having disability as a wheelchair user in a country that is not accessible by design was something that I knew intellectually going into it was going to be a challenge. And I guess I just had to remember to pack my flexibility, my sense of humour, and my adaptability to get around obstacles. And I guess the amazing thing is that we worked in an organisation for women with disabilities who had every kind of disability you could imagine. And their actual centre that they were working from wasn't necessarily accessible. I found that amazing that these women are so adaptable, so willing to work around and find solutions to their problems, that I guess I felt really empowered to be working with these women in such a way, and it stayed with me. So I learned a lot about resilience, and I learned a lot about small things make a difference in a community that has, on the surface, appears to have so very little. And yet they're so rich about how they support each other and how they can work together. We did a lot of development work with other aid programs that were in country. So being new expats, everyone was really interested in this new group of volunteers. So we had an opportunity to meet other volunteers working in other programs that weren't necessarily disability specific. But by virtue of meeting them and talking about what we were doing, we actually could grow incidental advocacy across a lot of other programs in country. And by that I mean people doing rural programs in farming communities all of a sudden became more aware that maybe they could look at how to use volunteers with disability in their programs, or when they were involved in design and development of programs and resources, that they could think more closely about how they could be inclusive in that design and how they could support people with disabilities to be involved. And I think that was a ripple effect that was really powerful. I had an opportunity, just an example of that, I had an opportunity to meet with an Australian volunteer who was working with architects who were coming together in Vientiane to discuss women's health centre development across the provinces of Laos. By pure coincidence, I got to have an audience with them and spoke to them about accessibility, not just physical access, but how they could consider the design and the information that they were providing to women. And they were so interested and so lacking in knowledge about accessible design principles. So we spent a lot of time talking to them and giving them resources, and we did a kind of a tour of a building to show them what was working and what wasn't. And I just feel really proud that we had that moment in time to impact on the development across the country of centres for women, who now women with disabilities could have access to those centres where they were about to invest a lot of money, and it wasn't even a consideration that if we hadn't have met, possibly would have been developed without that. And then women again would have missed out on access to healthcare that particularly in the developing country is so vital. So it's those kind of options when you're in country doing your volunteer work, your aid work, that I think are really powerful, that not only you work alongside the individual women in the services you're supporting, but you have conversations more broadly with people who can make decisions and influence change in a greater way than the benefit of what you're doing with one specific group. For me, that was a very powerful experience that I hadn't expected. And I guess we just worked conversationally with the women that we supported to help them practice dialogue about how to speak up for what it was that they were needing to be implemented in their communities, having the confidence in a culture where women are not necessarily encouraged to have a voice, and definitely not one that might go against the status quo. Another thing I found really interesting in Laos was that it's actually not legal for a person with a disability to drive a vehicle. And that is crazy to me, that having mobility, access to mobility, is such a powerful tool for independence. And in that situation, it just seemed to go against everything that the UN was about and everything around human rights and access to freedom. So we talked about the fact that people do drive, and they usually drive modified vehicles that are illegal. So they make themselves very vulnerable, because they're not only breaking the law, but if they get caught and they can't pay an on-the-spot fine or an under-the-table fine, then they make themselves much more vulnerable to the punishments and, again, another loss of freedom. So, you know, I just think that that's something that is a really powerful tool across the world, that people with disabilities have access to transport and mobility freedom. And I found it an unexpected, something I learnt unexpected about the situation for people with disabilities in Laos. We got to eat fantastic food and move around a community, and we dressed in a traditional way out of respect for the community. So I think that you need to pack in your kit bag when you're doing development work, the fact that you might be challenged culturally, and that you might need to be very respectful about asking what would be considered culturally appropriate in that community. And, you know, sometimes it's not easy to be a volunteer in a country that isn't physically accessible to you, that doesn't speak the same, you don't speak their language. And I think you just need to be good to yourself and seek support, and remember that most people want you to succeed. When you're there, you're actually there, and most people are very, very welcoming of your knowledge and how you can share that with them. So it's okay to kind of put your hand up and go, you know, I'm struggling today. I'm needing to kind of look after myself a little bit in this. And I think that makes you a better advocate if you can acknowledge that and seek some help. And it usually passes really quickly, because something really lovely happens and then it's all good again, and you can be re-energized to go off and do more work. I'm not sure, Chris and Jackie, if I've talked for long enough, or if I've even said anything that people are kind of wanting to hear more of, but I'm happy to kind of take a acknowledgement of if I'm on the right track.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've still got another 5 or 6 minutes. And I think what's so interesting is your viewpoint as a person with a disability who's also been a practitioner in a developing country. And the program that you were volunteering with is, for those who are not coming from Australia, we have an Australian volunteer program which has changed names 1,000 times. I think right now the current name is AVID, Australian Volunteers for International Development, but Jess will correct me in a minute. Has it changed already? There we go. But the overall program has been going for decades. I was part of intake 8 of that program, which might age me a little on the call while I'm still so young and fabulous. But in terms of women as practitioners, we're talking in this network a lot about professional development pathways and some of the opportunities for women to progress within the sector. And these volunteer opportunities are so important for people to get in-country experience, which is a mandatory for getting work in this area. So I think that what would be interesting, Chris, is you could introduce the DESI program and how you came to be a volunteer within that program, because I think the fact that that door opened itself to enable you to go to Laos in the first place is a pretty significant part of the story.
Sure. The DESI program was, when I got involved, it was round 2. So it was a government-funded project within the Australian Volunteers for International Development program. And they had a practitioner, and I'm not sure if she's with us tonight, Alex Kay, who is the driver of this program. And she worked with AVID to support people with disabilities on a trial, on a project basis, to see what would it take to support people with disabilities to be volunteers in a development program. The first group of DESI participants went to the South Pacific. They went to Fiji from memory, and they were a woman with vision impairment and several women who had hearing impairment, if I remember rightly. And that was a really successful program. They worked in country with people with disabilities and their families in organisations about what would work for them in an education. I think it was education focused. And when I got involved, it was the second round, and our group went back to Fiji and our group went to Laos. And I guess what the program was looking at was what supports does someone with a disability need to go in country. So I think the advice I have for people with disabilities who are, contemplating international development work is you need to be very able to articulate what your needs are, and you need to be very clear about the types of support that will enable you to be successful. And don't be frightened to share that with the program directors or the designers of the aid program that you're going to. I think it's about being clear about where you think you might need support in country, and even things like the policy that the government has about if it's somebody with a disability who's on a benefit and they're going to volunteer in another country. At that time in 2017, you could not be out of the country for more than 4 weeks with a disability before your benefits were affected or even ceased. And I think that is absolutely an issue that has to be addressed to enable people with disabilities to want to volunteer and not fear that when they come home, they are then going to have to go back through a process of reapplying for some financial support and assistance. I think that when you're a volunteer, you don't actually earn a wage. You might get a stipend and you might get your accommodations. So I think the government need to have a look at that. You're actually not about earning an income that puts you above the benefits bracket. That's definitely something that was evident from our program, and our program was specifically designed to only be within those parameters. I think it's important for people with disabilities to be leading the way around how to work with other people with disabilities in other countries to show them what's possible and share those experiences about the small steps that we've taken to get to that point. I think it's really important that people don't just assume that you're there all of a sudden. It's actually been a journey for most people with disabilities of being rejected, of trial and error, of not having employers provide you with the right access and inclusive environments, or not understanding why some of the things that people with disabilities need to have happen. It might be small breaks, it might be a screen reader, it might be whatever that takes is actually not an impost. It actually makes you a much more productive contributor to whatever program you're working in. The DESI program was only 2 pilots, and from what I understand, there hasn't been a 3rd round, and I'm not sure since 2017 whether DESI has now been embedded into the volunteer program. I Jess might know more, Alex, you might know more, but I think it's something that mainstream aid programs need to be able to consider. If a person with a disability puts their hand up to be part of a volunteer program, disability should not be the reason that they don't get included or invited to progress their application.
And just for reference also, I think we've only used that acronym DESI without explaining that.
Sorry.
No, I did the same thing. That stands for the Disability Empowerment Skills Exchange.
And
DESE.
It was really geared also, the DESI project, the skills exchange component of it was the really important part, because it focused on the volunteers from Australia with disability, working with people with disabilities in country. So it was specifically geared to focus on supporting other organisations in country with disability issues around how to create better opportunities and development for them.
Awesome. And Chris, while we have you, I'm one of the other key themes that I think we need to touch on in this discussion is the double discrimination that women with disability often experience, additional or disadvantaged twice. One related to gender and the second related to disability. How did you see that play out in the context of Laos during your placement there?
I think culturally, when you've got very traditional culture where the roles are very clear cut around women being the nurturer, the homemaker, the provider of childcare support, and it just being an expectation that a woman would stay home and the male might be the person that goes out to try to be employed and bring home an income. I mean, that happens across the world, but I think in a more traditional culture that is heightened. And so it's harder for a person with a disability, a woman with a disability then to be supported outside the home, because often the confines of the home are where she's got her access. It's easily accessible. She's created an environment around her and her family support her. Whereas in communities that aren't, developed around accessibility, it's not only harder for them to get out to be engaged in community, but they don't get the support to do it from the environment that they're in. I'm not sure if that makes sense. I guess what I noticed was the absolute strength in women with disabilities in their own community and the solidarity that they have with each other to help each other achieve the things that they need. In the women's centre I worked in, women who were traditionally from very impoverished backgrounds came across the country to this centre, and they gave up everything they knew. They gave up their families and their communities and often had suffered a lot of hardship on the way to get there. And they live for 6 months in this community where they don't know anyone necessarily when they get there, but they come with such enthusiasm and such commitment to learn new skills and be able to take that back to their villages to possibly then implement and make their own income as providers of services to their community that they can do from home. So I think it's about being able to empower women to have access to the resources so that they can become entrepreneurs in their own communities. I think we're not seeing, in my experience in developing countries, traditional employment opportunities being afforded to women, particularly those with disability. So I think in aid programs, one way we can empower women is to provide them the skills, but also the resources to be able to be self-employed and be the directors of their own future, and often do that from their home environment so that they can still manage those traditional roles that are expected of them.
Awesome. I have one last question for you, and that is that after taking volunteers with disabilities to some of our country programs over the last almost a decade, one of those called me 2 years after a journey to the Solomon Islands and said, Jackie, it's taken me some time to reflect on the experience, but everything that you said would happen at our pre-departure briefing happened. And it's taken me this time to process and to learn it. And I know that you've had a couple of years now since that journey to Laos. And so I just wanted to ask you about your reflections and your learning after that block of time since your in-country experience. And I'm sure that I've already can see some of the returned volunteers smiling at that question. But this is all part of our professional development and reflection.
I found it really hard to be home, actually. I really missed the whole experience. I missed everything about it, the people, the climate, the food, the working alongside people who were so willing and embracing to learn and, you know, kind of just to share that joy in people discovering their own selves, they're being empowered to speak up, knowing how to navigate systems that they possibly hadn't. I missed just the newness, how exciting that was to be able to work alongside people in that way. One thing I found really, really powerful for me when I was in the Women's Centre was I was doing a presentation for a group of women. There was about 40 of us in the room, all women, and we were talking about DESI volunteers and how did we get there and what's the government like in Australia and what's access like in Australia. And I mentioned that I was married and had a daughter, and a woman in the group looked at me, and in Laos it's a very, you have a public face, you don't get over emotional in public, that's not how it's done. And I was very surprised because she was crying, and she said to me, how am I going to get that life? How do I find a relationship, a husband? How do I have a baby? How did the government help you do that? And it took me by surprise, and I kind of responded very casually. In Australia, we're lucky enough that the government will support me if I choose to go back to work to help me look after my child. If I choose not to, it will support me to have support in the home to help me with raising my children. And we both just looked at each other, and I got overwhelmed with her reality. And I cried and she cried, and a lot of other women in the room were crying, because it's all very well as a volunteer to come in and say, this is possible. Where I live, this is possible. But we have to actually understand that for some women, that might seem like a long way away from their current reality. And so it's really important to help them understand the steps that they can take to start to move towards that kind of a future, and provide concrete things, helping them work alongside government, helping them influence policy and procedure, and things that sound really mundane but are really important to make that long-term change. And I got so overwhelmed by the fact that these women loved each other and supported each other and shared, you know, how do you get in and out of your wheelchair, and how do you get dressed in the morning, and how do you do this and that, that I remembered my journey as a woman with a disability when I was young. And I didn't have that. I didn't know any other women with disabilities when I first got injured. There was none in the rehab that I was in. And I missed sharing those private things with things other women with disability are the only ones that could understand. So I got very motivated, and I have created an online platform to share stories for women with disabilities around the world. So I encourage any of you here, if you want to share your story to help other women with disabilities just see what someone else's life is like and what's possible. And for me, that's one way to help people not feel so alone and not feel like they don't know how to navigate, that they can learn from each other, that we can share our stories and really help each other to make a difference.
Unreal. There's going to, if we weren't on a Zoom call, there would be a resounding round of applause and possibly a standing ovation.
Oh, I don't know about that.
At this moment. Thank you, Chris, for sharing your views right now. I think it's important to reflect also on the slogan for the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us. And your last 5 minutes there so much power in it about why organisations and governments need to do their consultation well, and for people with lived experience of disability to be included the whole way through that process. And some of the key words that I captured from your thoughts today was your initial mention of resilience, which is mandatory, and also something so timely for us to all factor in the post-COVID context, in the landscape where people with disabilities have been further impacted, depending on the context that you're speaking about. The second one was freedom, and that fundamental freedom. We often lose sight of that in the mess of getting the business of development done, but that end game of human rights and fundamental freedom is something we should never lose sight of. You mentioned also the experience of exclusion, and that's essential to have an understanding of, to unpack how we can begin to approach social inclusion. That's something that, just in reflecting on your words, we see a lot in the sporting context with people that have been, if they acquire a disability at some point in their life, there can be 12 years before they get access to sporting services, which is not right. Absolutely not right. But we can't unpack social inclusion until we really understand the experience of exclusion. And then the last point that you really brought home was about the strength of the women with disabilities in the communities that you encountered in Laos. And I think all of those key points are a really good grounding for us to take this discussion forward. And we're going to pivot to a slightly different direction and viewpoint from Alex Gatrell from World Vision Australia, who's going to build on this, but also expand and look more at an organisational and a policy level, I'm guessing. And Alex comes to us from World Vision Australia, where she's helping World Vision become an intentionally inclusive organisation where people with disabilities, particularly women and girls, are able to participate in and benefit from development programs like everyone else. Alex is also the chair of, the recently appointed chair of the Australian Disability Inclusive, ADDC.
Disability and Development Consortium.
Which is so beautiful that I stumbled on that. So, and I wanted to mention also, just in sharing how our journeys intersected, that within that ADDC network, that I was also a part of the executive committee for that for about 5 years, and also finished in that role of chair. So I think we share through that experience some viewpoint in terms of the steps of organisational change that are required. And thank you also, Rain, for acknowledging that I stumbled on that acronym, which I know so well. Captured for Prosperity on video. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Chris and Women in Development, for inviting me to speak to you tonight and to share a little bit about my career and reflections on international development, and particularly disability inclusive development. I feel honoured to be able to share what has certainly, by no stretch of the imagination, been a planned career pathway for me. However, in preparing to talk this evening, I have noticed there's a couple of key themes and threads that have consistently informed the decisions that I've made across my career, and that really bring the lens that I now bring. So I want to talk to 4 key points this evening. And the first one that I wanted to share with you was a little bit about what led me into this sector in the first place, because it does influence my approach to organisational cultural change. Yeah, I never imagined that I would be working on disability issues. However, I knew right from the start that social justice issues really captured my attention, and I went on to study international development and wanted to go overseas and experience the world and to see how people lived and get my hands dirty. So I had set off with curiosity and looked for an adventure and headed off to Southeast Asia and ended up in Cambodia, where I lived and worked for a couple of years, and have since been working there ever since, largely with the Cambodian Disabled People's Organisation in a range of capacities. But what really drew my attention was this fascination I had with the lives of the poorest and just how people lived in such challenging circumstances, and like Chris was sharing, often do so with such strength and resilience, and indeed have so much to teach us. And right from when I first went there, I started to notice and see the particular disadvantages that people, and particularly women and girls, faced. And, you know, so I ended up going back to Cambodia and doing my PhD on disability, and it was this question of the body that really fascinated me, and what difference the body made to people's experience. And having recently lost my best friend to a brain tumour at the time, it was a really pertinent thing for me. And so I ended up studying, doing my PhD on disability because of this intersection between the body and poverty and disadvantage. And so that's what really led me into working on disability, was this question that I had. And I really wanted to understand people's lived experiences of disability. And I must say that, you know, when I first headed out and started exploring disability, I didn't do so with much background in the area. I went with curiosity and a real desire to understand what were the key factors that shaped people's lives, and, you know, a lot of the social barriers and discriminations that they experienced. And I've since done a whole lot of different research projects over there, always in partnership with the Cambodian Disabled People's Organisations, looking at issues from disability employment to women with disabilities, access to sexual and reproductive health rights, and particularly many of the challenges they face entering marriage and finding partners. And those three disadvantages that Chris mentioned, the poverty, disability and gender-based discriminations, and looked at the impact of flood and drought. So I've always, you know, brought really and sought to advocate based on the issues that women themselves were telling me were the most important to them. That's always been my real thing. And so, you know, I guess bringing the second point I want to bring. So my first point there is follow your questions and follow those things that hold your imagination and keep your attention and keep you motivated and energized, and that you're passionate about, and make decisions from that place. It's certainly served me and really changed my perspective on many things. So the second point I wanted to talk about is the challenges of working in this sector, and particularly in a large mainstream development organisation, and trying to bring those stories and experiences of women with disabilities that I'm really quite, not from a lived experience, but I'm quite intimate with, having interviewed thousands of women with disabilities, many of them in Cambodia, how to bring those to light in a big organisation. And what I've ended up doing is working much more on internal cultural change than my position was originally designed to do so. And I've really brought, you know, a kind of a research project approach in my mind, in that I've really sought to look at the organisation as an environment and a group of people that I need to get to understand, to figure out how I can work most effectively with them and understand the problems that they face, so that I can present a solution to them. And the problem from their perspective is disability seems like another thing they need to do in what is already a very busy airspace. You know, they're really busy. So I've really tried to work in a relational way, and understanding the context of the organisation and trying to, where possible, integrate a disability perspective into what they're already doing. So, for example, they're already doing a whole range of assessments and M&E systems, so I've tried to integrate a disability and access and inclusion element into those systems. I've also really tried to work with using the organisation's language, the organisation's value and mission statement, and to hold them account to those. And World Vision very much talks to the most vulnerable child. So I see my role as really pointing out that that child is more likely to be a child with a disability than without, a girl with a disability more than a boy, and a girl with a sensory or intellectual disability, they're more likely to be poorer than a child with a physical impairment. So, and I also draw on the frameworks that come from World Vision International. So it's about trying to match practice with the stated objectives and mission. They also often want tools. They want quick, you know, they want a tool. And what I notice is when I talk to the staff in national country offices, it's not so much the tool they want the commitment to integrating those tools from within the organisational systems and processes, because they understand on the ground that people with disabilities are amongst the poorest. So there's no needing to convert them to that. It's really about supporting the process so that they have enough time and the disabilities integrated into their job descriptions, for example. And very much working to change the attitudes of staff from pity and charity-based approaches to more social and rights-based approaches that are based on delivering accessibility, as opposed to just identifying an impairment and then referring to a service and end of story. So, really moving past measurement or screening to complementing that and even taking much more of a community-based perspective that's focused on identifying and removing barriers. Both in changing social attitudes and practices in community, but also within the organisation. And I really have taken COVID as an opportunity to respond to the disproportionate impact on people with disabilities and the specific impacts on people, and have developed tools to help staff to actually go out and look for people with disabilities when they're already doing their COVID response stuff. So they're not doing anything extra, they're just asking a couple of simple extra questions and making sure that i.e. information and communications are in multiple accessible formats, that what was the other one? That some of the WASH interventions were all accessible to people with disabilities, and where possible, which is always possible, implemented in consultation with people with disabilities. So there's some of the things that I've been working on internally at World Vision. And I guess from my perspective, one of the reasons I wanted to work take on the role of chair with ADDC is to really leverage the collective advocacy to help, obviously at a sectoral level, but also because World Vision Australia is Australia's largest NGO, and I feel that we have a responsibility to be really role modelling disability inclusion within the sector. And what's actually happened, it's been really useful for internal advocacy as well. So that's really great. So some of the other challenges I found in working in the sector as really an agent of cultural change is, witnessing both on two elements here. And one of it is witnessing the inaction and the blind spots of people without disabilities, including my own inaction when and the ways in which in which I have before turned a blind eye. I know what that is like, because when I first came into this sector, years ago, there were instances when I simply didn't know what to do. And I don't say this proudly. The faces of some women with disabilities who I did not know how to respond to. And I did feel very overwhelmed, powerless in the face of structural and systematic disadvantage and discrimination that many of these women face. And what I learnt was how to act and to move through these feelings. I think disability can be a particularly challenging area to work in, and some of the stories that I've heard from women with disabilities are absolutely devastating and heartbreaking, quite frankly. And I think that we really need to be cognizant of that when we walk into this space, and be ready to get uncomfortable and work through our own feelings so that we can really bring compassion and strength and more passion to advocate for to people who are so strong. Like Chris was saying, some of the women with disabilities that I've met are incredible. And the other thing I've learned is we're all the same. And those women with disabilities that I've met, they have exactly the same aspirations, hopes, dreams, ambitions, fears and worries as what I have, as what we all have, as what you have, and what we all have as shared humans. And it was realizing that really struck a chord for me, and certainly has transformed me, and I think makes me a much more powerful and passionate advocate for them. Which brings me to my third point. I do feel very strongly and feel incredibly privileged to have had such a window into the worlds of women with disabilities, and to have interviewed so many over a range of projects over years. And I do feel a strong responsibility to them and to myself to share those stories and the issues that they find most challenging into spaces of power, and into rooms and meetings and forums and organisations, because they often cannot get into those rooms, and I can. So that drives me in my work with World Vision Australia and with the ADDC, and more broadly, because we do have responsibilities. There's international legal and policy frameworks that very clearly set out the rights of people with disabilities, and they also articulate our collective obligations as duty bearers to meet those standards of inclusion that those frameworks lay out, including DFAT's development for all policy and the SDGs, and there is many others. So we do have this responsibility to open up these spaces, to make space for people with disabilities at the table, and to ensure that our organisations that we work for are delivering accessible and inclusive programs. And to bring visibility, to strengthen the abilities of people with disabilities, and to challenge all these often negative stereotypes that are out there, and to start telling a different story that moves beyond the most vulnerable. You know, there's so much more we can be saying, God. So we need to bring all our voices and all our power to advocate on their behalf, and to be the change, and to show others how to be the change as well. I think it's really important. So inclusion is a mindset, it's an awareness, and it's an attitude, and we must continually remember that unless we're being intentionally inclusive, we are excluding. So I don't take lightly the stories that I've heard, and those men and women who've opened their worlds to me and their hearts to me, and it's their stories that keep me moving forward in this sector, and in advocating to make sure we're meeting standards that we advocate to. So that's kind of how I see my role. The other point I do want to talk to is about working in partnership with disabled people's organisations. Nothing about us without us. These are often small, underfunded, under-resourced organisations that often need ongoing funding for ongoing operational and administrative costs, things like staff salaries, electricity, paper, printing, telephones, stuff that often aid programs don't cover. And we need to work in values-based partnerships with them, and not in these service provider contractual relationships that model on delivery of activities. These type of relationships are transactional. Sorry, am I talking too fast? I just realised I'm getting a bit carried away. But they're transactional relationships. They're not transformative. And they may be meeting our objectives as aid agencies and ticking our boxes and donor requirements. We also need to make sure that we're supporting DPOs to be able to continue to serve their members. That's what these organisations are primarily about. And it's a little bugbear I have. So we do need to be teaching and showing aid agencies how to work in partnership, how to work together, and how to work in ways that are responsive to others and others' goals and objectives. So there is that's another one that's a bit of a big one there. Yes, my last point. I don't know how I'm going for time, but anyway, this one's important. Working together. This is not always easy work, and it's really important that we work together. And for a long time, I felt that I had to do it alone, without guidance and without role models and mentors, and without taking the advice and learning from those that had gone before me and that had wrestled with these questions that I was. How to continue to work in this space and to continue to be effective in this space. So working in partnership is not just the right thing to do, it is ethically and politically appropriate. It's also a hell of a lot more fun. It's much more joyful, and those women with disabilities out there in those villages in Cambodia are really fun. They're like slapstick Mr. Bean Khmer style. They're totally hilarious. It builds better relationships, and it's much more transformative, it's more sustainable, and it draws on the wisdom and the insights and the knowledge of everyone. So we do need to be supporting each other with the practical and the pragmatic and the political, as well as the emotional and the strategic parts of working in this sector, because this is what this sector requires of us. So together we do better. And the highlights of my work are always the times when I remember sitting under the houses with the women with disabilities out there in the village, having a good old laugh and sharing stories, sharing joys, and sharing challenges and often really difficult situations. But getting those issues and those stories that they were sharing on the agenda and bringing their issues to light and into recognition within the aid sector more generally. So I would like to say, in conclusion, be brave enough to work collaboratively. Ask that question. I'm not sure how to do this. What do you think? How can we do it? Ask the person with a disability. I'm not sure how to support you. What do I do? You know, they know what they need and they will tell you. So ask. And be brave to say no when something is not adequate and does not meet standards and our commitments and our obligations. I'm still learning how to do this work and how to do it consistently well, and how to most effectively bring others on the journey and to walk the talk. But the more I do it, the more I learn how important it is to speak with courage and bravery and vulnerability and passion and the kindness that those women with disability have repeatedly shown me on and on and on. And it's them that keeps me going, because they are just the most incredible, incredible women. So the other thing is, if I don't step in on their behalf, then maybe no one else will step in, and maybe they'll be forgotten one more time. And we could all be that woman with a disability that suddenly gets forgotten about, and no one wants to feel forgotten, alone and unloved and feeling unlovable, like you just don't matter. And many women with disabilities have said that to me. And so we do have to step in. It's taken me a long time to feel that I've had the right to speak on these issues as a woman without a disability. What I now know is that it's my responsibility to speak on these issues on behalf of those who are currently unable to access the spaces that I am able to. It's my responsibility to do all that I can so that others are able to do all that they wish to do. Yep, we're all the same. We all want intimate human connection with others. These issues aren't easy, and they require all of us to act, not just me and not just you. It's a problem that we all face and an opportunity we can all step into. So learn how to speak truth to power with kindness as an individual and together with others. Learn how to feel the emotions that come up when you witness suffering and how to be compassionate and to use that kind power to drive you forward. Learn how to work together to seek, to see and to serve, to ask and allow others to show you, to listen and to learn, to teach and to transform, and to say yes and to yearn for more for everyone. Working with women with disabilities continues to be a privilege that I'm so grateful to have had. Yeah. I hope I didn't talk for too long.
Alex, that was awesome. I think we're all on the verge of tears.
Oh, I
and
was.
We are connecting with the power and the emotion behind your words. And I want to thank you for also sharing your personal journey in this space. I know from, I echo that sentiment absolutely as someone without a disability. So, and it is really important to have this discussion open and upfront. And I really thank you for bringing that to the table today. Also, why I was really happy that Chris took the microphone first today, so that we lived that nothing about us without us value all the way through, which is something that we need to keep in mind front and center. And while we're at the microphone, we need to be using our power to get women with disabilities at the microphone more and more. I have a couple of questions that I wanted to pitch to you first, Alex, if that's okay. Just considering your vantage point at the organisational level for World Vision Australia, you mentioned in your opening statement that you approached that challenge like the organisation was an environment. We could talk about that for an hour, but I'm really, there are going to be people on this call working within organisations in very different and sometimes challenging contexts. And if they are a lone voice fighting for the rights of people with disabilities without that top-down support from the organisation, you can feel like you're on one of those wheels in a rat cage and not getting anywhere. So I just wanted to ask you what kind of strategies have helped you at World Vision Australia in terms of the top-down policy approach, and how have you gone about influencing the decision makers internally to get support for this area? You mentioned using stories, and I think we can agree that now that it's 2020, we've all gone beyond the question of why do we need to be inclusive, but how. So I specifically want to unpack that how at the organisational level.
Yeah, I think first of all, I worked relationally, and it's a big organisation and it's complex, and I just thought I'm just going to chat. And so, and where my desk was like in the middle of the superhighway, and we were still in the office. So I did spend a lot of time talking to people just to get to know the lay of the land. I've worked more closely with people who have been receptive, and people and sections who have reached out to me to ask for help and support. That's been a really good strategy. I've also been working through the Disability Inclusion Working Group that I co-chair, and more recently we've been working with the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion agenda within World Vision as an internal movement for culture change. That's been helpful, and like I said, really working with the systems that are already in place, so it's not about replicating. And when COVID came up, yeah, really using that as an opportunity to bring a disability lens to it. And yeah, I think they're the main things, working within the systems and trying to get some really good examples of how to do it and develop simple tools. Yeah.
Okay, so you would have a disability inclusion policy document for your organisation, given that you have accreditation with DFAT, the Australian Government's aid agency. In Australia, we also have a thing called the Australian Council for International Development, and the acronym for that is ACFID. And so a lot of people in the Australian sector will understand that, but that's an umbrella body which everyone needs to annually comply with their code of conduct. And some of those requirements also mandate that organisations have a disability policy. So I'm assuming that World Vision, given that they're a leader of that pack in a category of their own, would be ahead of the game when it comes to those policy documents.
Yeah, I've just updated the policy, actually, the 2017 policy, and that's just about to be updated and reapproved by the board next month. So that's really good. And I've added a couple of, sharpen the teeth in that. And I'm really trying to use that as an opportunity to get more internal dialogue around walking the talk. And, I guess I've taken the approach of, well, if core people within the organisation see it as a problem because we're too busy, or it's, well, how do I fix that problem for you? And so I suppose that's the lens I've sort of tried to bring. Well, what can I do to make it easy for you? But yeah, I mean, we're definitely really trying to build more momentum around the conversation around inclusion internally, and get that right across the organisation. I mean, to date, it's largely been a field-facing focus, and we're trying to bring that back internally. So there's more stuff happening around P&C, about procurement, around IT, about recruiting staff with disabilities, about previously making sure that the workplace was accessible, and now making sure that, online workspaces and Zoom meetings and all this stuff is captioned and accessible for people. Yeah, so just trying to make sure that it's as organisationally wide as possible.
Awesome. I think it's important to bring up at this point in the discussion as well that one of the big criticisms in terms of organisations tackling disability inclusive development is on, disability inclusion broadly, is tokenism. And this idea that organisations will take this on to tick a box, but not actually have the intention to really improve the lives of people with disabilities. I can see some heads nodding there. And I think that this is something that organisations need to protect against, to make sure that they don't get accused by key stakeholders of taking that tick a box approach and doing the absolute bare minimum to get through their compliance or accreditation, but they're actually taking this area seriously for what it means for the people that they work with and for. And I think that we've heard from the speakers tonight so far the passion that comes with that role, but we need more than passion to bring that to life within the organisation. And that's where we get to the nuts and bolts of the how, and how we get from how do we use the policy instruments, how do we advocate fiercely, and you mentioned, Alex, speaking truth to power. This is absolutely important to influence the decision makers, because without that, you can be one lonely voice trying to influence a whole organisation, which is in a sea of impending budget cuts, often the easiest thing to cut. And then what? So this whole idea about how do we mainstream that disability inclusion across the depth and breadth of an organisation is so interesting to hear how you've been tackling that with World Vision. And I'm sure that some of those steps will resonate with a lot of the people on the call, no matter where they are on that journey of inclusion. So thank you for sharing that. I also wanted to ask if this tied to that barrier and that fear, the potential risk actually of tokenism, is this perception that we can't possibly take any more steps with disability inclusion until we have budget to do so. How do you overcome that at World Vision?
Straight for the jugular.
Yeah. How do we start if no one's making us do it and we don't have any money to do it? Why should we do it and how? Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, you know, I always just say, you know, we do need to have a specific, it's not expensive and it doesn't have to be done by experts. And there's many, many things that we can do that are not just going to benefit people with disabilities. They're going to make our programs more accessible to across the board. And I guess I sort of try and say, well, you know, for information and communications, you know, there's, by putting things in multiple formats, you know, and using pictorial formats, yeah, we're making it easier for everybody. And there was another thing that I just thought of. What was it? Making it more inclusive for everyone, and it's not always expensive. Oh, there was something else. I forget. It'll come up to me. It'll come up later. Oh, it's an opportunity. I mean, I guess I do use the line that there is. If there is a tokenism there, it's a reputational risk. So I guess I really try and use it, you know, flip it on its head and say, well, there's an opportunity here for us to tap into a whole nother, well, from one side, a potential market for potential donors or sponsors in people with disabilities, supporting people with disabilities in country, for example. So, you know, I guess we're always constantly looking for ways to reframe things.
Mm-hmm. I've got one more question for you before we take a question from the delegates who are joining us tonight, our colleagues. This is looking more at World Vision. We initially looked at your organisational approach to embedding disability inclusion. Given that you work in the aid and development sector, you mentioned initially about your field offices and employment practices and inclusive hiring, etc. Given that this network is all about professional development opportunities for women in the sector, I'm interested to hear your thoughts and your vantage point from World Vision on how that plays out in field offices and also in your interactions with partner organisations, whether they're DPOs or other in-country partners, just in terms of the employment opportunities for women with disabilities in the sector.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm always pushing the line of, you know, where possible, let's engage people with disabilities, women with disabilities as enumerators as part of a baseline study, for example. If we're looking out for consultants, well, let's specifically look for people with disabilities. You know, let's make what we're doing already inclusive. Let's see. So, you know, like what Chris was saying, if we've got people with disabilities out there interviewing alongside other people, other interviewers, just, you know, as a staff member, just like anybody else, they're role models for other people with disabilities as well. So, yeah, I mean, always, you know, there's that tension between, you know, we always have to work with people with disabilities. It's the right thing. It's what we need to do. And yet, you know, disabled people's organisations are small, underfunded, under-resourced organisations. So, you know, I've seen so many times with lots of aid agencies coming in and everyone wanting to work with them, you know, there are challenges in figuring out, learning together how to do that best. And I guess that's the journey that, you know, World Vision's on at the moment. Some of our programs work with DPOs in country and some of them aren't. You know, there's a real diversity there, as, you know, some programs are more twin track, more targeted, other programs are, you know, more mainstream, but you know, we're trying to get more pockets of.
Can you just elaborate on what that twin track approach is? I'm sure that there's people that may not have heard that before.
So combining a mainstream and a targeted approach. So there's two ways to be inclusive of people with disabilities, and some are more are mainstreamed, and others are targeting just people with disabilities. We're trying to combine the two. So World Vision actually advocates a twin track approach. We don't advocate a mainstreaming approach. We're twin track.
And again, this comes back to that underlying human rights foundation that we opened our discussion with tonight. And there's more information on that if you look at the language that's in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
And Jackie,
everyone should go to that document as their first port of call for that language and how to reference it.
And in fact, there's a really great, the accessibility article in there, but also there's a UN document from ESCAP, UN ESCAP 2019, Disability at a Glance, and it's all about accessibility. And that's really useful one to look at as well. And there was something I wanted to say around the budget, getting back to that. I forget again.
While we're talking budget.
That's what I was going to, yeah. The importance of using these documents and ACFID and DFAT and these commitments that we've signed up against, our organisations sign up to, and using them to really strengthen our advocacy.
Yes, 1000%. And if that's not mandatory and it's optional, then people have a way out. So I think the benefit of that being mandatory is that organisations have to comply, and that's where you actually get organisational change, I think, when it's not an option. While we're on budget and putting your ADDC hat on, I just wanted to touch on the recent announcement with the cut to the disability budget.
Yeah, so the disability budget got within our aid program got cut by 25%. So it went from 12 point, I'm not sure, million down to 9.6 million. So it is quite a significant cut.
And in a sea of progressive cuts over, I think, 4 or 5 years now, this is phenomenal, and it's something that this particular budget line has been quarantined for such a long time, and it's something that the Australian government has been heralded for and celebrated around the world for being a leader in. So Chris, Kerr, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this particular point? I don't want to get stuck in here because we could unpack that for another hour.
Look, I'm just really glad.
But it's worth noting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think it's a cut to an already limited bucket of money in an area that's extremely important to progress people with disabilities taking their place in the development program world. I think that it's interesting to me that we've cut that, and yet if you look at DFAT, they've actually funded separately another bucket for women with in general to promote women in leadership. So I just wonder, have they been factored in other buckets of money around development that focus on women, so that when a woman with disability applies, there isn't the reason that they can't be accepted into a program because we haven't got enough money to facilitate all the resources that you need to get involved. I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think it shows that, you know, Australia holds itself up quite highly in the UN, in our meeting of the rights of people with disabilities, in our reporting to that. And yet we see that these things are actually being decimated in a way that undermines the work that we try to promote, that we're doing so well. And yes, I could go on, but I won't. Thank you.
I would like to throw to Rain Dixon, if you'd like to add a comment on this, Rain. I know you're very close to this issue. I can't see you, but please unmute.
Come back,
yourself.
Jackie. Yeah, so for the first time in 6 years, they've actually cut the budget. It was sitting at 12.9 million since 2015, since the Development for All policy was launched. It never went up in line with CPI, so it was kind of going slightly backwards anyway. But this was a really nasty shock this year, that they took a 25% hit. It is, I should say, it is the central budget that's run by the Disability Inclusion section in DFAT. So and they keep telling us this, it's not the budget that's allocated for mainstreaming of disability within the program areas. But since there's very little visibility of any of that, it's very hard to hold them to account on it. So this is the only really visible part of the disability budget in the aid budget. So it's the only part we can advocate on.
Is there anything that we can do collectively to help? Can we get on board with the social media campaign of ADDC or CBM, or are we letter writing and lobbying, or just generally jumping up and down and saying this is not okay?
There's been lots of jumping up and down and saying this is not okay already. So if you see anything on social media, then please do share from both ADDC or CBM or anyone else. IWDA did a lovely piece for Dev Policy recently that also had a really good observation in there on disabilities. So that was helpful when some of the organisations that are not disability focused specifically start to take on the cause as well. So social media, yes, but we're actually turning attention much more now to the budget in May. It feels like this one's a bit of a done deal, but we cannot allow them to lock in this cost, this cut for another year.
Okay.
So,
if there's anything that collectively we can support leading to that, please reach out. And there's strength in numbers. And I think this is the value of the ADDC network, in that it's a coalition of agencies that are advocating for that policy change and making sure that disability inclusion is embedded in the aid and development strategies led by the Australian government. So it's not all about funding, but that's definitely one of the priorities of that network. And I think we mentioned at the organisational level how to impact change. And I think the ADDC example is a coalition of agencies that are using their voice to speak up and to create change. And that's going beyond the immediate needs, goals and priorities of the organisation, and thinking more widely about the sector and where there is that power in the coalition approach and a united voice. So that means not asking for 12 things, but knowing what are the priorities and then specifically advocating for those really fiercely. So there's some different strategies at play here in terms of the how of going about disability inclusive development. And we've heard from the lived experience approach, we've heard from empowering people with disabilities in their local context and working together with local partners to make that happen. We've heard also about the organisational approach and some of the specific strategies from Alex. And Alex, thank you so much for your thoughts as well. My take home from you, although there was many, was being intentionally inclusive. Absolutely, it's not an accident. We need to take steps to remove barriers, and that needs vision, it needs emotion, it needs decisions, it needs policy, it needs foresight, but it needs action. And that also needs partnership. Definitely with disabled people's organisations. And in this space, you'll hear and see the acronym DPO all the time. And that's a critical part about nothing about us without us, and working at the country level with the organisations who represent the voices of people with disabilities, which is something that Alex also brought home as a fierce, you had a couple of very fierce points, Alex, and we're all with you 1000% of the way. But you also spoke really honestly about your personal reflections on working in this space and where you come from as a person without a disability. And I think it's important to reflect on that, because the people that you've come across are going to be on their own journey with disability inclusion. And we have to acknowledge that they might be at the beginning. They might have a family member that has a disability. They might have worked in the sector for a long time and have a particular approach. They may be a parent of a child with a disability, and they might come at this thematic area with a very different perspective to you. And there's not a one size fits all approach there. And you will be faced with some very challenging discussions and perceptions about what is acceptable when it comes to inclusion, how should you go about it, what is the right way, and what are the choices and the priorities of the individuals that you're working with. And there's not a it's not a black and white ball game here. Oh, that's a sport reference, sorry. But again, you come back to that fundamental human rights thinking to guide you in those decisions. But the personal reflections that you brought to the discussion today, Alex, are also really helpful. And thank you. Okay, so next I'd like to move on to Jess, who's going to share with us her journey. Now, Jess Richardson has just come back from Vanuatu. She was sadly snatched out of Vanuatu when COVID hit, along with at least one other person who's on the call right now. But Jess was on a volunteer assignment working as an equity and inclusion officer with VASNOC, which is the Vanuatu Association of Sport and National Olympic Committee. And she worked there with the Paralympic Committee, and Jess is going to share her experiences over many years in Vanuatu. And I also intersect with your story, Jess, so not to leave you out of the link to my journey, that we connected in 2017 during the Pacific Mini Games that were in Port Vila. Again, I saw the fruits of Jess's labour at the Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games with some groundbreaking results there. And again, at a regional consultation in Vanuatu in December, shortly before you left. So I've seen Jess at work in Port Vila, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our discussion this evening. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you so much. I just have some slides, so I'm going to try and screen share with you because I have a lot of stories that I'll share today of some of the athletes with disability that I worked with, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to be able to connect with them a little bit through some photos. So if you can just give me a moment to set up. Chris, I think you need to allow screen sharing. Thank you.
Is it possible to show your face at the same time as the screen sharing in case people are lip reading, Jess?
Yep, can you see?
Yeah, I can. We're good.
Yep.
Thanks.
No worries.
Go
How's
ahead.
that, Jackie?
Yep, perfect.
All right, so thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. It's really wonderful to be part of such a network of remarkable women. I just wanted to take an opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land of which we meet today. So for me, I acknowledge the Jerrinja people of Wandjirwandjia Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge the Indigenous people of Vanuatu, whose stories I have the opportunity to share with you today. To start, I want to share one of my favourite stories from my time in Vanuatu and introduce you to a remarkable woman, Friana Kovira. So Friana was born with only one arm and faced many challenges throughout her youth, including being bullied at school for having a disability. Fortunately, her parents were incredibly supportive and encouraged her to pursue success in both sport and life. In early 2017, soon after my arrival in Vanuatu, I travelled to Santo in the Northern Province to run a talent identification and training camp. Here I met a number of potential athletes, including Friana. Friana was selected to represent Vanuatu at the upcoming Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games with two fellow female para-athletes in the sport of para-athletics. The Commonwealth Games has been an integrated event since 2002. However, the 2018 Games would be the first time Vanuatu would send para-athletes as part of Team Vanuatu. And I should just add that when I refer to para-athletes, I'm referring to athletes with a disability or an impairment. So taking the three para-athletics athletes to the Commonwealth Games remains one of the highlights of my volunteer assignment. Sharing the journey with them, going through the challenges, and really getting a feel for what it meant to the young women was an incredible experience. We knew prior to the Games that Friana was in a really good position to be competitive, but we were not expecting a podium result. I remember sitting in the crowd and there was about 25,000 people watching, and Friana walks out into the stadium at only 19 years of age, and she was so nervous, and this had only been her second international competition, so a really big experience for her. And I remember watching, and her first two throws didn't stick, And I was so nervous sitting on the edge of my seat and hoping that her next throw would. And out of nowhere, Friana's third throw, it sticks and it puts her into the bronze medal position. So the final scores went up and Friana had scored bronze. Friana made history for Vanuatu on this day, winning the first Commonwealth Games medal in any sport discipline ever for Vanuatu. It was a first for people with disability. It was a first for women. And it was a first for mothers, all the things that Friana proudly is. This provided a really great opportunity to celebrate both women and people with disability in sport. Friana went on to win Emerging Athlete of the Year from the Oceania Athletics Federation. She secured employment with a local bank through the support of the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee Partnership, and she continues to advocate for the rights of people with disability and women in Vanuatu. This is just one of the many stories of success that I was fortunate enough to be part of during the last 3 years working in Vanuatu as an Australian volunteer under the Australian Volunteers Program. There it is, Jackie. I was assigned to work firstly as a Disability Inclusion Officer and later as an Equity and Inclusion Officer with the Vanuatu Association of Sport and National Olympic Committee. This gave me the opportunity to work closely with the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee, the Vanuatu Women in Sports Commission, and to promote inclusive sports development in Vanuatu. I really believe that sport can be a positive tool for development. Sport has proven time and time again that it can be a catalyst for change in many communities, in not only increasing the health and education outcomes of a community, but improving inclusivity and the well-being of many individuals. Sport encourages us to see everyone on an equal playing field. And through my work in Vanuatu, I have seen the perceptions of the community change in accepting people with disability as valued members of the community. I wanted to use this opportunity today to showcase how sport for development and inclusive development can be merged to promote the inherent strength and resilience of many people with disability. As a bit of an introduction, Vanuatu is a Melanesian archipelago of approximately 290,000 people living on 65 inhabited islands in the South Pacific. It is difficult to know exactly the number of people living with an impairment in Vanuatu due to the degree of difficulty in attaining data across the remote islands of which the country is made up. Added to this is underreporting due to the known stigma associated with having a disability. Globally, it is understood that 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. It is likely a higher percentage in Vanuatu due to limited healthcare opportunities. However, according to the national census, it was estimated that only 5% of the population are identified as having a disability. This makes it really difficult for disability people's organisations, or DPOs, to advocate for increased funding for programs and policies that fulfil the rights of people with disability. So how does this relate to sport and why am I so passionate about it? Well, sport for development refers to the use of sport as a tool to reach personal, community, national and international development objectives. And according to the UN, sport has the unique ability to transcend linguistic, cultural and social barriers, which makes it an excellent platform for strategies of inclusion and adaptation. The universal popularity of sport and its physical, social and economic development benefits make it an ideal tool for fostering the inclusion and well-being of persons with disabilities. Sport can help reduce the stigma and discrimination associated with disability because it can transform community attitudes by highlighting their skills and reducing the tendency to see the disability instead of the person. Through sport, persons with disabilities acquire valuable social skills, develop independence, and become empowered to act as agents of change. The power of sport as a transformative tool is of particular importance for women, as women with disabilities often experience that double discrimination that we referred to earlier, on the basis of both their gender and their disability. It is reported that 93% of women with disabilities are not involved in sport, and women comprise only 1/3 of international athletes at international competitions. By providing women with disabilities the opportunity to compete and demonstrate their physical ability, sport can help to reduce gender stereotypes, and negative perceptions associated with women with disabilities. So how does this look in Vanuatu? Well, in my first year in Vanuatu, I supported the VPC, or the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee, to set up a national para-athletics program. This began in 2 provinces, and we supported the Table Tennis Federation as well to build up their inclusive program, Smash Down Barriers. We focused on starting with athletics and table tennis because there would be an opportunity for both sports to compete in the upcoming 2017 Pacific Mini Games, which would be held in Vanuatu. This would be the first integrated mini games event. It would host athletes with a disability and would allow them to compete for medals, which would be included in the nation's medal tally. This presented a huge opportunity for Vanuatu to commit to including people with disability in the national sports program, and it allowed an opportunity to promote the inclusion of people with disability in the broader community in Vanuatu. The Games Organising Committee asked me to assist them in ensuring accessibility at the Games. I developed an inclusive assessment tool in consultation with the Vanuatu Civil Society Disability Network. I wanted to maintain an inclusive grassroots approach and so worked to uphold the mantra, nothing about us without us. This is an approach that I believe should underpin all community development work to ensure sustainable and intersectoral approach to program development. Together with VCSDN, we utilised the tool to provide recommendations to the organising committee on ways in which they could increase accessibility of their facilities, as well as provide opportunities for people with disability to be a part of the organisation. I also facilitated a disability inclusion workshop for all VAN 2017 staff, providing an introduction to disability as well as information on inclusive language. I went on to manage the para-athletes at the 2017 Pacific Mini Games. There was a team of 11 athletes who secured a silver and a bronze. And again, this team made history for Vanuatu. This would be just the beginning of what would be a series of history-making achievements to come over the following years. These games were a pivotal point in sport in Vanuatu. The Olympic Committee ensured the para-athletes led the team out in the opening ceremony to emphasise how Vanuatu should be proud of their para-athletes and that Team Vanuatu was committed to inclusion. Noticeably, the inclusion of the para-athletes in the Games made the community and media take notice. Media coverage of our para-athletes increased and the community celebrated as our athletes achieved success. What followed soon after cemented the broader community's support and encouragement of athletes with disability in Vanuatu. Following Friana's success on the Gold Coast, where she brought home Vanuatu's first ever Commonwealth Games medal, we noticed a real shift in the perception of people with disability in Vanuatu. Media outlets started requesting weekly segments from the Paralympic Committee. More people with disabilities started to get in touch with the committee on how to join, and local government authorities were consulted with on how to start para-athletics in their own provinces. It was really wonderful to be part of a movement that focused on celebrating the abilities of people with disability. We built off of this momentum to engage more sports in running inclusive sports sessions, and I facilitated a para-sports day in partnership with the Vanuatu Society for People with Disability, with a theme to ditch the dis. It was a clear message that it was time for Vanuatu to recognise the potential people with disability can make in not only the sporting sector, but in the community as a whole. I remember one of the parents, I was informed from their field worker that they had come in to the office at the Vanuatu Society for People with Disability the next day and said that my son had so much fun at the Parasports Day yesterday. He did not stop talking about it all night, and this made me so happy I was crying. So through this day, we were also able to identify a potential para-athlete who went on to compete in the sport Vaha, which is outrigger canoeing at the World Canoe Sprint Championships in Hungary. Our programs have continued to expand, and in 2019, I managed a team of para-athletics athletes at the Pacific Games in Samoa. In another statement of their commitment to inclusion, the Olympic Committee selected our para-athlete as the flag bearer for the opening ceremony. It is likely this is the first time a para-athlete would lead a team out in the Pacific Games at the opening ceremony from any Pacific country. It was a real highlight to see the full team support the announcement that our para-athlete, Ken Kahu, would hold the flag. Following this, Ken went on to attend the World Para-Athletics Championships, where he qualified for the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics, again making history for Vanuatu, being the first para-athlete to qualify on merit for the Games. The Vanuatu Paralympic Committee has focused on forming strong partnerships with government, national sports federations, local business houses, and disability people's organisations. This has allowed our programs to grow sustainably with local ownership. There were, of course, a number of challenges that we faced and continue to face. As always, in a developing context, we have difficulty identifying long-term funding opportunities and often rely on sponsorship and donations. Early on, we identified the need to provide bus fares to our para-athletes. People with disability often don't receive an education or don't finish school in Vanuatu and therefore have difficulty gaining employment. Many people with disability would not attend training sessions or events because they couldn't afford to pay for a bus fare to attend. We committed to providing all para-athletes with bus fares to remove this barrier and increase participation. A real difficulty in Vanuatu has been classifying our para-athletes appropriately so they can compete in a fair system. Classification is a part of the parasport programming and requires a medical diagnosis. We have had to work with the local health services, of which are really limited in some areas, to classify in country. This has been incredibly challenging because a lot of people who come to our programs have never actually received a diagnosis of their disability before. Finally, the geography in Vanuatu always provided interesting challenges. I often had to send papers on an aeroplane to another island for a team member to sign and then send them back, something that I'm sure we could just do via email here in Australia. This meant trying to complete administration tasks within deadlines set out by international organisations was often really stressful. However, even with these challenges, we have been able to set up one of the most successful para-athletics programs in the Pacific. I am incredibly proud of the work of the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee. It has been wonderful to see the influence our success has created in seeing a legacy of integrated competitions forming in the region, with both the Pacific Games Council and Oceania Athletics Association committing to running integrated events. Through our outreach across Vanuatu, we are seeing the community's perceptions around disability change, and their enthusiasm about everyone being able to contribute to society has been really wonderful. I'm not here to say that sport has removed all the barriers faced by people with disability in Vanuatu. However, it has provided much needed visibility to the stories of people with disability in the country and has highlighted their strengths and ability to contribute positively to their community. Not to mention, it has also provided personal achievements to those who take part in parasports programs, improving their confidence and health outcomes. Our organisation has also focused on ensuring our para-athletes are supported in seeking employment opportunities by both encouraging local government and business houses to provide those opportunities for people with disability, and then by linking our para-athletes with these opportunities. Sport is just a pebble dropping in the water of inclusion. However, the ripple effects continue to be seen with increased acceptance of people with disability in the community. I want to finish today with a quote from one of our national team para-athletics athletes, Ellie Enoch. She says, "Sport has changed me. It helps me to know that even with a disability, I still can take part in sport and in my community. Sport helps me to stand up for myself, to feel confident to face whatever challenge I come across. So don't look at your disability, look at your ability at what you can do." Thank you.
Again, standing ovation and a round of applause for Jess Richardson. This is so strange to be doing this on Zoom, but hear that deafening applause for you, Jess. Truly, it's so exciting to hear the journey, the challenges, to thank you for sharing the photos to really bring those stories to life. Having connected to your story and your experience as a volunteer, I'm familiar with a lot of that story, but also the essence of what you mentioned in terms of how sport is a mechanism for disability inclusion. That resonates firmly with me, and of course has guided my career path. But it's transferable, and it's that journey of inclusion that we're trying to capture here today. And whether it's in the education setting, in the technology setting, in the healthcare setting, it doesn't matter. That process and the evolution of inclusion is the same. So some of the things that you captured there so well was that starting point of changing the perception of people with a disability themselves. Number one, that they can, that they're strong, that they have the potential, and that they can move forward in whatever it is that they want to do. And I think in the World Disability Report in 2011, by the World Health Organization and the World Bank, this is something that they highlight, that it's about changing the attitudes of people with disabilities themselves. And the second point to that that's reflected in the World Disability Report is changing community attitudes. And I think you highlighted so well in those stories and in your experience of how sport has helped and how the steps that you took to be intentionally inclusive in Vanuatu helped to change community attitudes. That wasn't an accident. That was an intentional use of athletes as role models and spokespeople. And I understand what it takes behind the scenes to encourage those athletes to speak up in front of the media and to speak up in front of everybody, anybody, in fact. It's not an accident that all of those things come to light. It's a strategy to be able to create that influence that you're looking for. So huge congratulations on behalf of all of us for your efforts in Vanuatu. Together with commiserations for being ripped out of there early. Nothing that we can say right now will make up for that, except that we're with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, you mentioned also about, and this is a very different approach to what we heard from Alex with the top-down policy influence. You've been working from the bottom up, that you've been doing the hard slog to produce the results and then engaging the government to create systemic change. It's a long, slow fight. And I understand what it takes to do that, but we need both of those things to happen at the same time to make sustainable change. And the steps that you've taken to do that have created dozens of advocates and a coalition of agencies who are on board with that message. So in terms of that, the system that you've created and that you use sport to generate in Vanuatu, it's not a sport-specific example, is what I'm trying to bring up here, is that all of those things are possible if you replace the word sport with education or health or a different sector. And it's the mechanism that we're trying to really bring home today. I love the outcome there. In sport, we often talk about intended and unintended outcomes. And for Friana, you mentioned that through your partnership with sponsors, she now has gainful employment, which is phenomenal. How do we replicate that for everyone? There's some really good stories of change in here, and we need to make sure that that's not for individuals, but that's an opportunity for everyone, no matter where they're coming from. So I totally celebrate the journey there, and appreciate how many people that you're trying to influence through the work of the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee. I know when I was there in Port Vila with you guys and I say you guys, and I'm looking at Jess and Jill, and I know Shirley Randall's on the call, and I just said you guys, and I promise I'll not do that again. And you both will will remember that that was at the same time as the government was holding a sport competition to reintegrate the 2,000 people that were displaced after the volcano eruption in, I can't think of the name of the island, in Vanuatu. And the role that sport was playing there is quite phenomenal, not just for individual athletes. And I just want to make that point that sometimes people see the success stories of athletes and they think, oh, that's about individual change and getting one person onto the medal dais. But we're really not talking about that. We're talking about opening doors for everybody to be able to achieve. But Jess, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things you mentioned there about people with disabilities changing those attitudes themselves, about influencing the attitudes of the community, of the media and the government. And 5 key words that I wrote down from your thoughts was strength, ability, power, spaces for change, and stories. And you use them, all of those strategies so well to achieve what you did. And here's hoping that your journey in Vanuatu is still beginning and will continue when we all get through 2020 and move on to whatever is coming next. So with that, absolutely. Friana did appear in a video for International Day in 2017. She was also in a case study that I believe CBM produced and displayed at the ACFID conference the year before last in Sydney. So Friana's story has been getting some mileage in the aid and development sector already. And thank you, Rain, for sharing the clip of her story. It's absolutely worth sharing and watching. Now I'd like to open to some questions to all of our speakers. We've got Chris Kerr, who we heard from first, joining us in WA. We have Alex joining us from World Vision Australia, and Jess, who's sadly not in Vanuatu. Where are you today, Jess? Are you in Queensland?
No, I'm in New South Wales on the south coast.
Right. Excellent.
So still close to the ocean, which is nice.
Excellent. So let's remember that we have been reflecting tonight on improving the lives of people with disabilities. And I'm open to your questions from either, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask the question personally.
Jackie, Amanda Watson has been waiting for a little while, so I think we should go to Amanda first.
Please do.
Amanda.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just had 2 quick questions for Chris Kerr. And so those questions were about the motor vehicles that you mentioned, Chris. I know it wasn't your main point, but I was just interested whether the policy regarding modified vehicles for disabled people in Laos has progressed at all, if you know anything about that, and also just for your comments or anyone else on whether this policy problem is common across developing countries or unique to Laos. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda, for the question. When we left Laos in 2017, we'd raised this issue with the ambassador for Australia that was in Laos at the time. So we had met with him and his group of staff and explained that we uncovered that this was an issue for people of Laos with disabilities, and they had said that they would look into it and see how they could impact any change in that area of policy. To be honest, I don't believe it's progressed anyway at all. And that's just my feeling. I haven't had any response from any of my counterparts that that's actually developed into something more positive. And part of that problem then is all to do with infrastructure, because once we started unpacking the issue of access to transport, not only just your personal vehicle and having a license, but public transport, making that more accessible either through mainstream public transport, which is virtually non-existent, or paratransit opportunities, then people started getting nervous about the cost of infrastructure. So, you know, curb cuts, ramps, public toilets in community, all of those things that go around when people move about in a public place and park. So I think that the problem is certainly not resolved and certainly hasn't been addressed in any meaningful way, and that's a really sad situation to have to confess.
Can I add just a reflection on that in terms of delivering a sport for development project in Nepal a couple of years ago with DFAT funding, which is from the Australian government. We budgeted for accessible transport, and this was for a national initiative across 5 regions of Nepal. We brought together disabled people's organisations up front and did our consultation to work out the best approach to be inclusive and to make sure that we were reaching children with disabilities and teachers of children with disabilities through our program, which was essential. But what ended up happening was we didn't need that travel budget because the people with disabilities already had solved the problem themselves. Most of them had their own scooter, or they'd pick up a mate on a scooter. So we were standing there with cash and receipt books ready to give out cab vouchers and, you know, travel allowances, which nobody claimed. So we ended up needing to reallocate that somewhere else in our budget later. So we initially thought, oh my goodness, we're going to have to make sure that travel is one of these things that we'll have to have a dedicated budget for. And 2 years in a row, we didn't use it. So I've been, go ahead, Chris. I've been pleasantly surprised by that in a couple of countries.
And I think the interesting thing to note, Amanda, in that is that in the group of women went on the DESI project with me to Laos, 2 of us had physical disabilities and required transport access, and there wasn't anything available. There was no accessible van or no accessible transport. So we both managed for the month in a non-accessible situation, relying on support and help from other people, which also is challenging to your dignity and your own sense of self, having to kind of give that up, relinquish that independence. But I'm really pleased to say, and this kind of quickly, in the Women's Centre, they had a van. They said, we've got a van, it's for transporting women. And we said, great, show us, maybe we can borrow it. It wasn't accessible. They had portable ramps that were literally this steep. They had no tie downs. They would put plastic garden chairs in the back of the van, and women with disabilities would get carried and put on the plastic chairs. And then they would drive around Vientiane in crazy, crazy traffic in that situation. And so I'm really pleased to say one thing we did do was we got our funding to be reallocated, and we got an engineer to come in and put tie downs and safety straps and a removable ramp that was way more functional into that van. And in Vientiane, and the Women's Centre said across Laos, that was the first wheelchair accessible van that they had and the only one in the whole city. So at least we achieved something for the women in that centre for safety and dignity. But, you know, people do what they've got to do to survive and to move around. And so, yes, I think we mustn't forget that mobility and access to transport is freedom, you know, and it just makes people so vulnerable when we have to put ourselves in situations of risk to be able to move around our own communities. It's crazy.
Leslie?
Yeah, I'd just like to direct my question to Jessica. I loved your story about Vanuatu. I'm actually from PNG. So I just had a question on the sustainability of the program in Vanuatu. When you leave, like, I know that you were, one of the strongest, what should I say, the building block of that program. And I'm just, it's such a shame to see you ripped away from Vanuatu, but if you could maybe share some insights on how you see the sustainability of the program. And my second question is about replication. How would you see this kind of wonderful program being replicated in a country like PNG or other Solomon Islands or other countries in the Pacific?
Thank you, Leslie, for the questions. They're great. I mean, I went in under the Australian Volunteers Program, and a huge part of that program is around building capacity in countries. So we don't want to ever go into a situation where we leave and the program that we are working on cannot continue. Right. So a big part of my role was to make sure that I was building capacity in country. And for this particular program, it was with the Vanuatu Paralympic Committee. Okay. And that committee is an incredible group of women at the moment, particularly, who will continue to do the work of promoting inclusive sports in Vanuatu. Yes. I did leave, but I am still in contact with them, and I do support in a remote capacity, and I think I always will, because you know, I was there for a short amount of time relatively, but they all became family to me, and I have such a really strong connection to them, which I think you can understand, PNG, Melanesia. Everyone is just families. So yeah, I think it's absolutely a huge issue in development is the sustainability of programs and funding, like the other hand of that. And a real difficulty that we have is around, you know, finding the funds to do the programs. So we've taken it. I saw there was a question in the comments around how we have been able to reach some of the remoter communities. It's obviously islands that we're working on, and we had to take it really slow because we wanted them to be long-term programs. So we started in one province and we worked with organizations that were already existing. So Athletics Federation already existed. There were disability people's organizations that already existed. So we worked with them to find key people that could be the coach or that could support to bring people with disability from the community into the program. And then, you know, I was only on that island for a short time to help set it up. And then I would work remotely with those key people to make sure that they were able to continue to run the program. But there were issues of getting equipment over and that sort of thing. So we took our time with it, and I think that's really important. In development, you can't ever rush something, and we have to make sure that, you know, that whole nothing about us without us approach, we had to make sure that we were working with the local disability people's organizations to implement our programs. So to your second point, I think definitely these programs can be replicated, and I've worked with the Oceania Paralympic Committee, who are trying to support the development of these programs. I think you're aware in the Pacific there are a lot of challenges around getting active committees. A lot of times people join a committee for the name, but not necessarily to do. And so we're trying to support, through the Oceanian Paralympic Committee, identifying these key people in country who are doers that can help to move those programs forward. I think, you know, in Vanuatu, we often find that people wear a lot of hats. There's a lady, and Jill will know, Annalyn Lulu, who works or used to work with the Vanuatu Association of Sport National Olympic Committee. She wore like 5 different hats and worked for different organizations. And once you take her out of the mix, it's like, well, then what happens, you know? So we wanted to make sure that in developing these programs that we had really strong partnerships with the disability people's organizations in country as well as other sports organizations.
Okay, thank you. You're doing such a wonderful, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomas.
We can also...
Jackie, can I jump in there for a sec?
Sure.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, for those who don't know, Jess said she was there for a relatively short amount of time. She was there for almost 3 years. So she did, she did very, very well. And I was very, very lucky to be a first-hand witness to most of what Jess did. I was there for 2 out of those 3 years, top and tailing. And the key elements that have come out of the work Jess did, as well as the work around disability, especially in sport, sorry, I'm croaky, is, as she said, the partnerships. So it's that capacity building, and it's the partnerships that even carry on now. So addressing Leslie's point in that I mean, obviously remotely, I'm in Melbourne, Jess is in New South Wales, and I know both of us are still in constant weekly contact because of things we're working on for our individual organisations, which are actually partnering in a lot of stuff. So the organisation I was doing work for with volleyball, it has an MOU and is now in partnership with Vanuatu Paralympic Committee. The programs are just, especially with disability, not even just the sport for development programs, but especially in the disability sector, are just exploding even without us actually there on the ground, and especially Jess. So we can carry on helping them from here, but a lot of it is down to the capacity building that Jess did, along with some others, where the organisation, and VPC is not a big organisation, but it is very strong as an advocate for people with disabilities in sport. So the stuff that's going on, I mean, I know from volleyball, we're expanding to it now with the new programs coming up and hopefully new funding from DFAT, which is in the process at the moment, where we're able to move programs around disability in sport. It's sitting volleyball, para beach volleyball, all of which we're newly introducing to the outer islands and stuff. And to local communities, and now into the school system. And a lot of that basis came completely out of the foundation work Jess did with VPC and some of the disability advocacy groups within Vanuatu, both in Santo and Port Vila and stuff. So yeah, there is a huge amount of legacy and sustainability that Jess has managed to establish that is absolutely going along at full pace at the moment. So yeah, it's worked really well.
Can I add to just around legacy and an issue that we've had in country that ties in with the discussion, Amanda and Chris, that you had earlier around transport and accessibility? It's been a huge issue in Vanuatu. There is one accessible van in country that is privately owned, and that's in the city. And then there were, when I worked with the VAN 2017 Mini Games Organising Committee, I think they had about 12 buses, which they converted, I think similarly probably to what you did, Chris, in Laos, that they were able to, allow wheelchair access into the bus. But after the games, there were issues around legacy, and those buses didn't go to disability people's organisations, which would have been such an incredible opportunity to have, inclusive transport options in country. And my partner who's on this call, hi Matt.
Is about to say that. Does Matt want to say anything about this?
He worked at the Vanuatu Society for People with Disability. He's a physiotherapist and worked within community-based rehabilitation. And if you check out their Facebook page, Vanuatu Society for People with Disability, there's a great video there that he put together around their need for accessible transport, because when I say bus, it's actually just like a van that what you'd see in Australia, where they probably have, the 12-seater vans. And so there's no real room. Like, I'm quite tall and I would really struggle to get inside one of these buses. So you can imagine if you have mobility issues that is quite difficult. And then there will be people in wheelchairs who would have to, climb up the bus to get in using their arms, and then someone else would have to put the wheelchair inside. Or in other cases, people were lifting people into the bus, but not using correct techniques. So, huge range of issues that come with just one challenge around accessible transport. So I think there does need to be these steps to build in legacy. And, for us at the Paralympic Committee, we have a bit of a band-aid approach by providing bus fares to people with disability, but that's, all that we could do at the time. But we certainly hope to be able to continue to petition the government to use those accessible buses that came out of VAN 2017.
I think it's appropriate that we ask Matt if he'd like to make a comment now.
He might have gone. Might be dinner time out there.
Where is he, Jess?
I think he's out in the lounge room, maybe. I'm stuck in the art room.
He was there a minute ago. I saw him a few minutes ago in there.
Okay.
But Matt was working, it should be said, Matt was working really hard towards the end of his assignment as well, and to the end of his time in really raising awareness around transport, trying to raise money to get an accessible bus for people with disabilities and that. So it was one of his sort of pet things. There he is. Hey, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, it cut out. I think just when you were asking me a question or something, so I didn't catch that.
Sure. No, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak because you've been thrown to a couple of times there, but I think it'd be appropriate, particularly when we're talking about that accessible transport issue. That's something that you connected with during your time in Vanuatu.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I was there not quite as long as Jess, but I worked with the Society for People with Disability, which is the really the only service provider for people with disability in the country. So it's not a DPO, but it was working with the national DPO and with all of the smaller local DPOs.
And for those on the call who aren't familiar with the difference between a DPO and a service provider,
yes, a DPO is a disabled persons organisation, so it is made up of people with disability. It's run and managed by people with disability for people with a disability, whereas working with VSPD, which is a service provider, so it's not, you know, we try as much as we can to have to include people with disability in the makeup of the board and of the service providers, but it's not. So we don't class ourselves as a DPO. Yeah.
That's an important distinction for those who are just connecting with the sector for the first time. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. And that was a learning curve for me as well. So I came from a health background into the disability sector. So being a physio, my role over there was to support in setting up and assisting with the community-based rehab program, which is, for the people who don't know, that's a model of service provision that the World Health Organization provides. And so I was just involved in helping to set that program up. And well, it has been set up for quite some time, but just to realign it and make it a little bit more up to date. And one of the biggest things that I was trying to work on was to get some wheelchair accessible transport there. We were on a bit of a roll with that. We had organised lots of fundraising, and I was going to be heading over to the US this year to do a big trek, and I was doing some fundraising for that when my assignment finished. That all fell through with COVID, but it's still in the works. We're trying hard. It's really difficult to try and get some, even to, like the logistics of trying to purchase the bus and then to get a bus over to transport it over there, really difficult. So Chris, telling your story with you know, access, getting in and out of an inaccessible bus, I 100% hear you. The video that I put together, it's very amateur, but it just shows some of the challenges, you know, for spinal cord injuries, for people with polio, people with, you know, that were born with no arms and no legs and having to be literally crawling into a bus and sort of really taking away their dignity. So yeah, that's one of the biggest areas I think that I'd like to see change. And that's just a drop in an ocean really of need. Yeah.
Do you know which area of the CRPD that relates to?
You're putting me on the spot now.
Yes.
No,
or Chris. Or Chris. You're muted, Chris.
I was going to say, you've put me on a spot too now. I can't recall off the top of my head. It is related, definitely, and it's part of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes, awesome. And I can tell you about the sports section, not about the transport, although every time I Google a document for sport, it always comes up as transport. So you guys are winning. But for sport, Article 30.5 of the CRPD is what we always go back to, which is where it spells out with that fundamental human rights approach that persons with a disability have the same rights on an equal basis with others. And so just from that thinking of the human rights approach, no matter what area of disability inclusion that you're tackling in whatever context and whichever country, you can go back to the CRPD, which is a legally binding instrument that has been the most consulted international policy document. And we have an advocate in Australia called Graham Innes, and he was the Disability Discrimination Commissioner for many years in Australia. And he has an example of that he describes when they were trying to make a casino in Cairns in North Queensland accessible. And there was one older guy who used to gamble in this casino, and his name was Eric. And so they went and asked Eric what he needed in terms of access. And Eric he'd had a stroke. So he had one of those wheelchairs that he could self-propel with one hand. And when they renovated the casino, they made it fit for purpose for Eric and nobody else, because he was the only person that they asked. I can see some head shaking there, and this resonates with many people. So when we talk about consultation, we talk about meaningful consultation and making sure there's going to be trade-offs along the way when you're making decisions in your programs and your policies. But something that's going to work for one disability group is not going to work for the other. So making sure that you get a range of voices at the table, that you've got that empowerment and ownership from that human rights platform of people with disabilities, making decisions about their own fundamental rights and freedoms is imperative in no matter what development thematic area you're working across. So just a couple of take-home messages there when it comes to that rights-based approach and where to go to. A few things that have come up in our conversation have been about the choice between mainstream and twin track. And if those terms are not familiar to you, I encourage you to have a look at the language that's inside that CRPD, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's not an accident that I've said that 12 times tonight. It's an important, absolutely important framework and a fundamental document that should be guiding you in your practice going forwards. So that consultation is absolutely important. I really want to thank the speakers that we've had tonight for sharing such personal reflections and also for sharing your professional development journeys in this space and how it's connected to the aid and development sector. We've all learned so much from hearing your experiences, and all of it connects with us in wherever we are on our journey, whether we're right at the beginning or whether we're some way through as a practitioner at the organisational level, or at the personal level in our lives. So I really want to thank you for your openness and honesty in really tackling this topic. Everyone comes at it from a very different perspective. There's been a couple of really take-home messages, and we've articulated those after each speaker, so I'm not going to rehash those again. But what I do want to highlight is a couple of takeaway actions. We've heard a little bit about storytelling and about how powerful it is for people to speak up, no matter where you are in your journey. And I'd like to encourage everyone to do that. So after our discussion tonight, there's a few options through the Women in Aid network where you can link through our, what do we have? Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm sure there's more. Instagram. I'm a little bit old for Instagram. But there's so many ways for you to connect. So when you do that, don't just say we went to this session and it was great. That's an opportunity for you to advocate. So if you're advocating for transport, plug it. If you're advocating for education or healthcare or media or sport over here, whatever it is, you can add your message in there. Every time you get to the microphone, you've got a chance to speak up. Within your organizations, I really want to wish everyone success patience and tenacity in the journey forwards, because I understand from my own journey working and headbutting against many different senior management levels that it's not a smooth ride, and you really need to leverage your own support networks, find allies within your organization, and persist against all odds. There's a few heads nodding there. We've heard such passion from the speakers tonight, and I really echo those reflections and your shared experience of working within the area of disability inclusive development. It's been one of the most rewarding aspects of my professional life as well, and something that once you step down this journey, you can't step away from. And I can't wait to see that journey continue for everybody else who's on this call. In terms of other ways to connect and to speak up, we've got new events and activities coming through the Women in Aid and Development Network. And stay tuned, because through the website and through email, you'll be hearing some more about that from our fantastic team behind the scenes. There's a couple of documents that I wanted to refer you to. One is in the Pacific context. The first quadrennial SDG report was released. That's got some good stats and figures about the context of disability inclusive development in the Pacific, and it's tied to the SDG reporting. And that high level reporting is something that you can use in your own program reports and pitches. The other one, again, this is a Pacific context, but I wanted to bring it up because it's phenomenal. And this was produced by the Pacific Disability Forum, which is a group that is really a strong advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities in the Pacific. And they've produced a CRPD, so the rights, they've done a monitoring report that links the CRPD and the Sustainable Development Goals in the Pacific context for 2018. And that is something that's got a wealth of information in there and data that you can use and draw on, and of course stories. And there'll be more of those for Asia, and I'm sorry I don't have those at hand tonight, and I'm not even sure where everybody else who's joining us is from, but these are a couple of examples where you can leverage high-level documents and reports, the latest data and stats to help you further your cause and win over those decision makers that may be a speed bump on your way to full fundamental rights and freedom that we've already spoken about today. Coming up, we have December 3, which is International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Again, there's more heads nodding. This is a day that is for all of us, an opportunity to advocate for disability inclusion in whichever sector. Every year, this is on December 3. This is an institution. It's not the first time that this day is celebrated on the UN calendar. And because it's been around for such a long time, it's a packed calendar. So the time is now to start working with your in-country partners, with whoever you can network and form a coalition with, to plan your events and celebrations for December 3. This is the time where you can speak truth to power. You can bring your coalitions together and have a rally, have a media event, have a sports carnival, do whatever it is that you want to do in your context to raise awareness about the rights of persons with disabilities. And again, get those spokespeople to the microphone that we know have a story to tell. I'm going to hand over now. Actually, one last point on this year's December 3 is that the theme for 2020 is that not all disabilities are visible. And I just encourage you to take a look at the website for that. And I'll put it in the chat box while Chris is wrapping up, so you can connect your events, activities and celebrations this year with that theme to make sure that we follow that SDG agenda and truly leave nobody behind. And with that, I want to thank again our speakers, and I'll hand over to Chris, who's about to mute me.
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Jackie. I won't keep everybody. I know we're on right on time, but I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, many thanks, Jackie. That's fantastic. I want all of you who are still here, before you go, I want you to share a few words in our chat box to tell us what you've learned or how you've been inspired tonight. We want to use it in our social media, so please give us a few words, tell us what you've been thinking. I want to echo Jackie, thank you. Jess, Alex and Chris, fantastic speakers, inspirational, authentic, passionate, made us all cry. I just love what you've done. We can't give you an enormous amount, but we are going to give you a wonderful Women in Development mug, and that will be coming out to you, so you can use that one with pride and say that you were a speaker for us. It's great to see everyone joining us tonight. Such a great evening. And we hope to see you the next time, as we will have either online or in person. And we want you to bring, you know, dogs, cats, birds, whatever you've got. We love it. One tip I want to give everyone tonight, and this is for your professional development. We've had a number of people, in fact, 2/3 of people tonight. I've just got your name. When you're doing a Zoom call, you don't always want to be on video. You've often got issues with connection. Put into your Zoom thing a photograph. Make sure that people can see who you are in a professional context. Even if you can't have the sharing of yourself, people can see who you are. And we know people make decisions about who you are very quickly in what they can see. So a professional picture, same as you've got on LinkedIn, really important thing to do. Next session that we've got coming up, and I can't remember the date, but someone will remind me. It is on managing contractors. We're going to have that at the end of the year. If you've thought about working in one of those organisations, or you've been there and come back, we will hear all about it. Mentoring program is coming. We've got some stunning mentors lined up. We're just organising so that we can bring in mentees. Check it out on the website, please. Thanks to everyone who's joined us. We've got Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, regions around Australia, London, Gold Coast, and PNG, was it, Leslie Marie? Fabulous to have everybody. And I'm sure there were some others coming from other places. So thank you. Join us again. We love having you here. We want to share the important information that people and women within this sector have. Great to see a couple of blokes. Come again. We love seeing you. Hi there, Damien. So thank you all. Have a great night. I hope a few of you come again and have a glass of wine with me. Again, Jess, Alex, Chris, you were absolutely fantastic. Thanks a million. And Jackie, couldn't have done it without your wonderful facilitation and sharing. Good night, everyone. Come again. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
will share some of those resources. Don't worry. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
See ya. Oh.